Welcome everybody to today's session on youth homelessness. We're thrilled to have, people are just coming in right now. I see the numbers going up, up, up. And while they do, I'll just welcome everybody to the Housing Equals Justice 18th Annual Training Institute and Conference hosted by the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. It's been an amazing conference so far. We're one day into a 5-day extravaganza, 9 to 5 every day with hour-by-hour sessions. So hope that you're checking out the many different sessions. And it's all very exciting. We have over 1,000 people registered. So it's really wonderful to see so many people who are passionate about ending homelessness. Next slide, Mariana. So welcome again to the Housing Equals Justice Conference. We are focused together on the themes of racial justice, economic justice, and criminal justice, which run through everything we are doing together to end homelessness, and are focused on those issues as well as the question of how COVID is affecting our work to help people become housed. And so we're glad that everybody is here joining us for these wonderful sessions for the Housing Equals Justice Conference. And I should mention to make sure that you use the hashtags ATI 2020. There's a lot, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so please follow us. And I also want to thank our sponsors. So a special thanks to our presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Zillow, who are making this whole conference possible so that we can offer it free of charge to all of you. And also to the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities, which is our workshop sponsor for today. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roy Graham, who's going to introduce our presenters.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Roy Graham. I'm with the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. I am the Youth Special Projects Coordinator, and we have an amazing panel for you today. We're going to be discussing youth homelessness and the impact of COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic on youth homelessness. With us today, we have Glori Bowman from Youth Continuum. She's the housing coordinator as well as the youth navigator. We have Omar McDew from the city of New Britain. Good morning, Omar. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. We have Kathleen and Katie Durand from Connecticut Department of Housing. We have Ewurabena Acquah, who is a youth panelist with us today. Good morning, Robbie. And we have Angel Cotto from Youth Action Hub. All right, great. So as Madeline was stating, this session is going to be on youth homelessness, and we're just going to have a conversation about the impact of COVID-19 on homelessness among youth and young adults. You know, in recent times, Connecticut has made significant progress in the effort to end youth and young adult homelessness in the last several years, but the impact of COVID-19 has posed new challenges for us, right? So while there's been increased public attention on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on youth homelessness, this conversation has mostly focused on adults and families and less on the youth population. So while many believe that these new challenges range from issues that relate to housing access, the lack of housing options for young people, leaving the criminal justice system, discrimination and equity in supports and services, as well as access to employment and education. So this session will discuss how the pandemic has impacted young people experiencing homelessness and how it is both accelerating and bringing new challenges to our statewide movement to end youth homelessness. So while we're sitting here, I'm here with my laptop in my home, and I did not even think that in March that I'd still be here in October, right? All this time later. And what that has done, right, has made, okay, it's have laptop and phone will travel. So everywhere I go can be an office, right? So when I think about that, I think about, you all and what you do and how the impact of communication and technology has affected the way that you work now that you're doing it mostly remotely or on the road, and how that affects the way you interact with clients, but also your co-workers as well. So Glori, I want to start with you. How has that affected the way you do your job?
So initially, when we first were told to, we had to work from home and leave the, right now I'm at 924 Grand Avenue, the drop-in center. When we were initially told that we had to leave, and because of COVID, we're no longer taking clients to come into the drop-in center, and the CAN assessments, coordinated access, would be done remotely. It was a challenge because not having that face-to-face interaction with a client, not be able to look at them, earn their trust, build that relationship was different over the phone. So now I have, just thinking back to housing somebody in shelter and getting them to like disclose a location with me and earning their trust took, one client took me 2 months to house her because again, she wasn't trusting me to let me know where she was at, where she was staying. So the impact of having, not being able to have that one-on-one interaction with a client, it was hard to navigate at first, but I think as we continued to be in this crisis and this is a new way of communication, the clients have gotten more comfortable speaking over the phone, FaceTiming, and kind of letting us into their world, so to speak, more now that we've been months and months into the pandemic. So at first it was challenging, but I feel like now that it's a new normal, it's getting a little easier. And now that we have been here for months, we have been opening up the drop-in center, at limited capacity, appointment only. So it's gotten a little bit easier.
Yeah, and yeah, to comment on that, it's having that relationship and trying to build that relationship with the client, right? In order for them to build that trust that you were just talking about. So having to try and navigate that, I'm sure, posed a challenge. Angel, what are you seeing out there? Because you're out there a lot as well.
Yeah, so I would definitely say that I've been seeing a lot of the opposite lately. I've been, when COVID first started, it definitely was a huge challenge for youth and young adults to get connected to resources and to have conversations with folks. But there was a large effort on both sides to really, kind of find an in-between of just how can we use what technology we currently have and just ways of communicating to making sure that people get connected and get resources. But I've definitely been hearing from, providers, from case managers, and also from young people that we, and it's also been my experience myself that we've just kind of gotten worse at this over time. And I think it's not that we are inherently bad at using the technology to connect with youth and young adults. It's that there is a certain level of Zoom fatigue, and there's definitely a mental health barrier that's happening on both sides. I would say that's preventing people from getting connected. It was really easy at first, getting excited to be working from home or collecting unemployment or just being able to do things on a virtual level, whether that's like trying to get your food stamps, trying to, go to the DMV, trying to do all these things. At first, it's like, great, I can do all these things from home. But after a certain amount of time, it just gets really stressful, just always not having someone in person to connect with and being able to ask these questions that you usually were able to, trying to just be on Zoom calls for 8+ hours a day, it gets to you. And at some point you just have to turn that technology off. And I think it's really showing that young people have been harder to get connected to, and it's harder to connect them to other resources because of not being able to meet in person and only being able to do things through technology. But I'm sure in some areas, communication is better and easier because we have the technology to do so, which before you had to go in person, and transportation's always been a hassle, but I think between mental health and just not being able to connect with our providers, I think it's become a huge barrier.
No, thank you, Angel. And I'm going to hold on to that mental health and services as we move further into the discussion. Robbie, welcome. How was it for you to navigate without being in person during the pandemic?
Like Angel said, it's so much easier to, talk to family, to connect with friends. And fortunately for me, I have an online job, so I get to work from home as well. But it gets to you. It definitely gets to you. And I think the constant Zoom meetings, the constant having to be present, and it almost like you don't have a break if you don't manage your time and if you're not well disciplined. It's really difficult, but I'm really hoping that this comes to an end soon.
And Robbie, I agree with you about that whole all day, because I was shoving food in my mouth before this because I know I probably won't eat again for the rest until the afternoon. So absolutely. Katie, with what you do at DOH, it's not actually client facing, but I'm sure there were obviously some challenges there for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, for DOH, we've remained fully operational. As you mentioned, we don't provide direct services, so we were able to continue on and do our work. And yeah, we have a lot of Zoom and Microsoft Teams meetings, but it hasn't been a huge issue. But it's mainly been working with the providers on the new remote flexibilities, such as figuring out ways to implement remote HQS inspections, the housing quality standard inspections, and working on figuring out how to do, remote CAN assessments and all of that, which, I agree with Angel. While it has its level of convenience, like we've seen actually a spike in the attendance rate for our CAN appointments now that we're doing remote, because it's more accessible. For those who do have phones, you lose that connection that you get from being in person, and that trust, which is so important to the work of our providers.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we're going to get to some of those policy changes and some of that as well that has been able to help and assist with remote CAN assessments and housing, like HQS, housing quality standard inspections as well. So absolutely. Omar, man in the streets, man out there connecting with schools as well, and running the Juvenile Review Board. How has COVID impacted you out there in Central Connecticut, New Britain?
Well, being a city employee, we came to work every day, even when we were in phase 1 of the pandemic. So I still came into work, and we didn't get the opportunity to work from home, and nor did I want to work from home. I'd rather come to work every day and kind of resume some sense of normalcy. So that was good. But being the youth advocate, I work, hand in hand, face to face with kids. That's my job. And not to be able to do that has definitely slowed things up a little bit for me. Our JRB is shut down because court wasn't, there weren't any referrals coming in for probably 5 months, from March 18th till I think I got my first one back in like maybe September. So that slowed down. A lot of my referrals come from school, from fights and whatever happens at school. And obviously schools were shut down. So I didn't really have access to my kids. And policy in City Hall was, we couldn't have anyone in the building for a while. And then when we did allow people in the building, they had, right now they have to have masks on, and we have to keep our social distance of 10 feet or whatever. So it's difficult to establish relationships. I've gotten better at it through, kids that have Zoom and They have Google Classroom that the school uses, so I've been able to connect with some kids. But New Britain, it's assumed that everybody has the technology and the Wi-Fi, and they don't.
Right.
So especially the kids I deal with, the ones that, you know, get arrested or, you know, are not going to school. Those kids, you know, we have some that are homeless that, you know, are living in hotels or living in a friendship center. They don't have phones. They don't have the technology to access me or whatever other services are out there for them.
No, great. Yeah, no, thank you for that, because technology is a barrier that we know for a lot of young people these, you know, during the pandemic. So hopefully that we'll be able to remedy that soon, especially for the young people who need access for education.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so Katie, I just want to let attendees know if they want to submit questions. We have the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and we'll try to get to you and your question throughout the session as well. So Katie, I wanted to go back to you. You touched on two things that came to mind. You touched on one, which was the data, because you saw the increase, you were saying, in people coming, or at least calling 211 or trying to get access to services. And number two, policy. Like, how did, first, I want you to touch on the data, and then second, I want you to touch briefly on, you know, the policies that were put in place that were able to assist, or that you were able to work with providers to help them while going through the pandemic and working remotely.
Sure. So first, I guess you mentioned the data. So we've been sort of tracking the inflows throughout COVID, and have noticed that the inflows are the number of scheduled CAN intake appointments, which is really the front entry to our system, remains roughly about the same for this population as it was back in 2019. However, what we are seeing, as mentioned, is an increase in actual attendance to these appointments. So the overall inflow is larger. And prior to COVID, we were seeing a large decrease in youth on our by name list due to some of the the new HUD resources that we received through the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, which put online rapid rehousing, youth navigator programs, diversion rapid exit, as well as crisis transitional housing. So we were able to chip away at that list and help a lot more youth, but now we're seeing that start to tick back up due to a lot of challenges such as landlords and just the difficulty of trying to work remotely and provide case management remotely. In regards to policies, yeah, as mentioned, so again, a lot of our programs for youth are federally funded, and HUD has allowed a lot of flexibilities in these programs, such as we're now allowed, we don't have to do a one-year lease, we can do a shorter term lease, which is good, especially because a lot of our youth going into some of these programs don't have income, so it allows for a trial period. We're also doing, as mentioned, we have to, before providing any kind of rental subsidy to youth, we have to do these housing quality inspections, and usually that means going out and thoroughly reviewing the apartments, but now we're able to do those remotely. Again, as mentioned, that the CAN intake appointments are being done remotely, and 211 is trying to work with folks, especially those who don't have phones, trying to, as they can, connect them directly to our youth navigators or scheduling appointments. It's been tough with like the libraries and drop-in centers and other community resources that typically our youth rely on being closed, but we're starting to see those open up more.
Excellent.
Yeah. I can go on, but I'll stop there.
I mean, all of these topics, we could be on here all day. This would be an all-day session, right?
Yeah.
So before I move on, I want to just talk to, ask Robbie, since Katie brought up landlords, when you were in your search, how was your interaction and communication with landlords in that whole process?
It was okay. It was all right. I know they just kind of wanted to get the person in there. I know for my landlord, he really just wanted to get me in there. And after that, I didn't really hear much from him. But the process of contacting him, the back and forth, I just feel like they're not as reliable. They don't take it as huge as a priority as you guys take it. So that's the difficult part. But yeah, most of the time they just want to get you in there and get their money, and you don't hear from them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, to them it's a business, right? And not really a people business, but a money business, unfortunately. But I'm glad the process seemed like it was not as harrowing for you as we've heard in some other stories. So
it was howling for Gloria to track them down. But yeah, it was pretty hectic.
No, that's great, because I was going to move to Glory. Like, Glory, some of these policies and so forth that Katie was talking about, how did that help you? And as well as more people attending appointments too. Did you see that as well?
Yeah, so the change in, like Katie said, that there was, we weren't actually having to do the 1-year lease, that we were being a little more flexible around the crisis, helped me house more youth, because there were landlords that were willing to take a chance on, like, say, someone that had misdemeanor charges, that didn't have rental history. And so I was able to go to the landlord and say, okay, you don't have to do the year lease because of the pandemic. We're allowing month to month, 6 months. So if you give this client a chance, at least I could get them in. And then the client was willing, knowing that they had to prove themselves every month or get that money up, was, they were able to do that instead of being denied because, a landlord didn't want that long-term lease on them. So that was one good thing that came out of it, is having shorter term leases for some clients. And then, like Robbie, she had no problem getting in with a longer term lease, because fortunately she had a stable job and things like that, but not all the clients do. So and even being able to kind of help them within the month if they're falling short, if they lost a job, and we're able to kind of navigate around that sometimes. So it was the policy change did help.
Excellent. Angel, I'm going to go to you because I wanted to go to Omar last, because there's a couple of things but one thing in particular that Glory had brought up that I want to piggyback with Omar on as well. So Angel, please.
Yeah, what was the question? I was just listening to all these great responses.
Oh, it was on, well, right now we're on the policies that were enacted during COVID that Katie had mentioned. And also, since you talked to a lot of the youth and there's been an increase in youth attending assessments, is that something you're seeing? Does that, coordinate with what you're seeing out there as well?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a larger, I have definitely seen easier access for folks to get to appointments and at least have that first conversation with a CAN officer, operator, whatever you'd like to call them. I think what I'm seeing oftentimes is that folks are either usually getting immediate help, like they get that CAN appointment, they speak to that person that week, they get into housing all that same week. Like it happens immediately, especially if they're experiencing literal homelessness, or often we usually see is they're either safely doubled up or there's just limited resources within their region. And so they get that first CAN appointment, which is great, but then they're just kind of waiting for months, or if they're safely doubled up, they've already been waiting for a year or two for resources to come up. And so I think that's something that we all have seen, a lot, and something that we're all aware of. But I think it's, important to mention that we're definitely seeing both. And I've been hearing from folks in some of the conversations that we've been having and some of the focus groups that we're having, that the help was either really fast and immediate and it was great and they got their help and then they were done, or people have just been waiting for what seems like forever and there's no end in sight because there's no resources for them. There doesn't seem to be any next step, and there doesn't seem to be any, plan or problem solving that's happening with youth and young adults at the moment, which we know we have youth navigators to do so, but it also seems like not everyone's getting connected to a youth navigator, and youth navigators we already have now, it sounds like that they're over, that their caseloads are too high. And that's what we've been hearing from young people, some from YHDP programs. Usually we've been hearing better stuff around YHDP programs, and what we've been hearing about a lot of the adult programs is that they get connected with case managers or they get connected with a navigator, and then they hear from them once, and then that's kind of it. And then not a lot of youth choice. They're kind of just thrown into a house or a resource that they've never seen before. And then, yeah, just not a lot of good connections that I've been hearing about. But youth are looking and they're getting whatever resources, information they can, but COVID's definitely making it harder for them to get connected to resources outside of housing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's going to be things that areas where we can improve, right, and areas where we can do better, even when it's in pandemic times or pre and post COVID. So, Omar, I want if you could comment on what everyone was saying, and then I'm gonna see if we can take a question or two from attendees, and then I want to come back to you after that.
Yeah, the few clients that I deal with that are experiencing homelessness, I've only dealt with probably two really during the pandemic, and both of them were successful going through the 2-in-1 process and getting in touch with the youth navigator immediately. Actually, I just talked to the youth navigator about one of my clients that's ongoing last week as a follow-up, and we got her housing within her family unit. And the youth navigator was very good. And I do believe her caseload is high, to Angel's point. But she's kind of a go-getter. She's new to it and she's got a lot of energy. She got my client situated in housing within her family unit as best she could, and the girl's doing fine as of right now. My experience with the 2-in-1, I think it's been great so far.
Great, thank you, Omar. And I know who that youth navigator is out there in Central, and I second it. She is amazing. So, Mariana, if we could take a question or two from the audience.
Sure. Do you have a preference for what question?
No, I do not. If there's one specific to a person, that's fine. Or if there's one just general that folks want to take it upon themselves to answer, it does not, no preference.
Omar, what about the question from Jessica?
Do we want to unmute Jessica, Mariana, or do you want me to just read the question?
Oh, you want me to read it?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This question is for Omar. So what are towns doing for the kids living in shelters who are supposed to do distant learning? Where are they logging into their classes? How are the schools accommodating them? So I can only speak for New Britain. regarding that question. We have, I forget what they're called, but we have personnel staff in the school that go out and do a lot of outreach to kids that are not attending school and not logged on. Every kid in New Britain since the pandemic started has been given a laptop to do distance learning. And even that, there's probably 900 kids or families that have not shown up to pick up their laptops. The staff that have reached out to those kids, that are supposed to be, doing it, and they're not, they're trying to find them and track them down. In New Britain, we have a huge transient population, so it's hard trying to figure out where people are, and their addresses are not what that we have in the computer system is not where they're currently living. They're pretty good at finding them. It just takes a long time. And then once we find them, trying to give them their laptop, number one, and make sure they have Wi-Fi access, number two, because that was an issue that even though we gave out 10,000 or 12,000 laptops over the summer, there was no hotspots, not enough hotspots in New Britain to cover. We've had local businesses provide hotspots and free Wi-Fi for everybody. So I believe the entire city of New Britain is covered for free Wi-Fi access. That being said, still there are people out there that are just never have logged on. There are people that have gotten computers and never turned them on. So the district is trying and they are reaching out, but I can give you numbers. New Britain High on a regular school day pre-COVID, we're probably 2,300 students at New Britain High School, which is humongous. I mean, it's the third biggest high school in Connecticut. Yesterday, we had 400 people in school. Wow. And granted, we do it in cohorts. We divide the cohorts into two groups based on their last name. So, which should mean that, we should have, 1,200, 1,100 kids a day. But there are a majority of those people are online and their parents are refusing to send them to school. So they are doing remote learning. But there is still a big chunk that they're not showing up for school and they're not logging on for school. Well,
great. Thank you, Omar,
you're welcome.
For that. Just going to take one more question here. I believe the name is Lara. Hopefully I got that right. Lara asks, I don't usually work with youth and I'm a rapid rehousing case manager. I attended this webinar to learn more as I often have youth approach me on the street or who have been referred to my agency. How do I connect them to someone who can help them? We do not have a youth coordinator in our agency. And that's opened up to the panel.
I think connecting them to 211 maybe would be the best thing, doing the youth navigator for that region, depending on where they're located. And I know, like, one of the questions also was like 211 takes such a long time. If you can actually get a name of the agency and call them, we can do a provider registered call, which would be take less time. Unfortunately, the wait times sometimes are prohibit a client from actually calling into 211. But if a client can get it, even with you as a rapid rehousing case manager, can call with the client, get a hold of the youth provider, and they can actually do the 211 call with the client. Anybody
want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to definitely add to just making sure to call with folks, because I know one of the biggest barriers is, once again, that communication piece. I know, as we all know, youth and young adults are experiencing so many different things and being pulled in so many different directions, sometimes don't know where they're sleeping at night, going through a lot of stress and mental health. And so, honestly, like little fun fact is that memory is a huge side effect. Memory losses from anxiety and depression happens often, and I think a lot of the things that we're witnessing is that youth and young adults have conversations with 211 and sometimes with CAN managers, and often miss what they say or misphrase it, or they hear it a certain way, or they have certain expectations. And I think the most important thing we can do is have these conversations with 211, with youth and young adults, and making sure that we're hearing all the information and we're explaining what some of this information means. Because if I'm being quite honest, a lot of it is not explained very well on that phone call, because I think sometimes it's not very like just trauma informed, but it just making sure the young person understands like what the process is and whether or not they're going to get help or resources, how long it's going to take, you know, setting those expectations. Like a young person, all they're listening for is, are you going to help me or not? Am I going to get housing today or not? Am I going to get housing this week or not? Like, that's all they're listening for. They're not listening for like your appointment's on this date and, you know, we can get you into a shelter if you meet these criterias, or there's other resources if you meet these criterias. All they're hearing is, are you going to help me today or not? And then when they hear that not part, they don't want to call again. They don't want to talk to anyone again. And I think it's really important to set the expectation that, you know, 211 is going to help. At the end of the day, that is what they're here for. They help a lot of people and they give a lot of information. They connect people to a lot of resources, but very often it's going to take time. And if we set that expectation from the front, we'll have a lot less young people who have failed expectations and decide to just cut our system off completely. And that is just crucial, because we need to make sure that young people understand that maybe it's going to take 2 weeks, maybe it's going to take 2 months, but if you continue to connect with your folks within your region and your CAN and with 211, we can make sure you get that resource. But the day that you give up on our system completely is the day that we can't help you anymore, unfortunately.
And to piggyback off that, my experience with that is just what Angel said. My client that I've just dealt with my youth navigator, she was instructed to call 211 initially, and she called on her own, and she has multiple dual diagnosed mental health issues. So to Angel's point, she didn't understand what they were talking about. So she was, you know, she'd given up and blah, 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 and then got to me, and then we called 211 together. So, you know, we were both on the phone with it, so I can explain to her, okay, this is what this means, this is what that means. You have an appointment here, you need to go there. This is where the youth navigator is going to be. So I think it's important that we not just say, here, call 211. If we can, if there's an agency, a youth serving agency that could be with that person during that call to better explain, I think that will go a long way in helping our youth.
Yeah, no, I agree with both with everything that's been said. Robbie, comments, like what your experience, and you know, this is in your own words, and you know, so you speak freely, please.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everyone. Just, I called several times and it was hard to understand. It's hard to even ask questions because they kind of make you feel bad. So I went to the center, and Glori was able to stay on the phone with them and me and help me understand the procedure, help me understand everything. So I would say the best scenario would be to call with, you know, a navigator.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I you know, I agree with what everyone's saying, and you know, I know that Katie and Angel, you both do a lot of work and trainings and have discussions with 211 and trying to make the system as, you know, better and more informing as it could possibly be. So always a work in progress, and continue to work on it. Thank you for those questions. We'll try to get to a couple more before we end the session. Omar, I was saying that I wanted to get back to you because Glori brought up something specifically about criminal backgrounds and criminal records. I mean, one thing we know about COVID is COVID-19 actually exposed a lot of the disparaging and inequities in health, in the criminal justice system, in, and what is happening. So COVID-19 exposed where we were deficient when it came to equity. And so I want to bring up the topic of equity, as it is right in the forefront of everything that's happening right now. So Omar, being that you have direct firsthand knowledge, how are you incorporating equity in what you do every day? And I'm gonna, pose that question to everyone, actually.
You mean equity involving kids that are like the criminal justice system?
Criminal justice system, in schools, out when you're doing on your outreach.
I can speak a bit on educational inequity. New Britain's school district is, it's no secret that we're, at the bottom of the barrel in the state of Connecticut pre-COVID. During COVID, that disparity has grown. The difference between the New Britain school systems and our resources for kids, our educational resources for kids, how our kids test, all that kind of stuff. That gap has grown significantly, I think, since COVID, because of the gaps in technology, the gaps in attendance in school, being in school and even logging on. It's harder for our kids, and we have a very large population of students that English is not their first language. It is very hard for our kids to be on a computer and learn by looking into a screen. They need that personal face-to-face interaction. So not having that available for such a long time, and even now, even though they have the opportunity to go to school and their parents are choosing not to or whatever, that disparity is growing and growing and growing. And how do we close that? I know, we can throw money at the situation all we want, and we've gotten money to get everyone laptops, and that's great. But it's still, until we get on equal footing with attendance and kids actually, being in class, and, we can close that gap. But with COVID, it's going to keep growing and growing and growing, and we're far behind as it is, and I think we're falling further behind educationally. Criminal-wise, I haven't seen, since we haven't been getting a lot of arrests, because I want to believe that during this COVID epidemic, when it first started, the police were instructed not to arrest the little stuff, because they didn't want the face-to-face interactions either. So I didn't, courts weren't getting a lot of referrals. The referrals have started picking up recently, but the referrals we were getting were the domestic violences, families shut in together too long and getting on each other's nerves, that kind of stuff. That is continued. But as far as the arrest stuff, that's kind of fallen off, which is a good thing, I guess. But they're going to be on the uptick.
No, thank you, Omar. And families getting on each other's nerves, that was me pre-COVID. So that's
well, it's getting worse. The more we don't have services and places for kids to go,
right,
they're going to be home. And here's the other thing with COVID, and what I've seen is now that they're kids, once they are allowed to, quarantine is not the first priority like it was when we were in phase one. Now that, things are getting a little loosey-goosey, kids are all over the place. They're riding their bikes, and, a lot of these kids, I'm getting, you know, some trespasses and stuff like that, because the kids are, you know, there's no, like the boys club in New Britain just opened up back up, but before a time that wasn't open, so there were less things for kids to do, so they were finding themselves, you know, getting in trouble. I had an arrest for kids riding their bikes at the police station lockup, where we, you know, we hold all the stolen vehicles and whatnot. They were just riding their bikes up there, so they got arrested for trespassing. So COVID has, you know, shutting down the services. Someone mentioned the library and places, the Y, and, you know, boys club and places where kids go. Take those things away, and kids will, you know, find trouble.
Glori, in what you do, how do you ensure that, you know, the young people that you serve are getting, you know, equal services, that they're not discriminated against? How are you using equity in your everyday job?
I don't know if I can actually make sure that, you know, we can't force a landlord to take our client. So there are landlords that have like worked with already that are willing to house the clients that our population. And recently we have had another agency partner with us that is actually, her job is to engage landlords and let them know about our clientele, and that has been working a lot better, opening more doors and opportunities for our clients to get housing. Still, the problem is affordable housing for many of our clients, because they don't have a high income. So that's been a problem, having, you know, getting them where they can actually afford an apartment and in the price range that they need it, or trying to get them to consider roommates and things of that nature. So having those conversations realistically, looking at their budget, they could afford, what's out there, and then these are the landlords that are willing to work with you, that are willing to give you that chance. And there's still, like, you know, we can't force that on a landlord. So when we have those landlords that are not willing to work with us, we move on from them and go to the ones that are willing to work with us.
Yeah, equity in housing was, you know, a challenge pre-COVID. So there's a lot of work to absolutely be done there. Katie, how can we ensure, or what is being done to ensure that the system itself is being equitable to people experiencing homelessness?
Sure. So all of our YHCP programs, again, those are the federally funded youth programs, are required to have anti-discrimination policies. And every youth should be getting a client bill of rights which outlines some of these rights and the way to you know, reach out to HUD or CT Boss or file a grievance policy if they feel like these rights are being discriminated against. We also have looked at the proportionality of who's entering onto our by name list, as well as then who is getting housed, kind of looking at for folks who have exited off of our by name list, their outcomes by race. And Apt Associates actually has provided us with census data to look at by region, the number of young adults by race, so that then we can kind of break that down by region as well and look at the disparities, and then also break down the outcomes off of the by name list by race as well to kind of look at that. Also, we are getting close to the end of our 2-year demo period for YHCP as well. And we plan on looking at outcomes via race, as well as via sexual orientation as well, because that's something that's data that we have been collecting for YHCP. And our providers are in the midst of collecting youth participant surveys, and we've added questions that collect information on race and ethnicity to be able to look at responses based through that lens as well.
Thank you, Katie. And yes, again, that data piece is so important in everything that we do, for us to be able to enact and drive changes that we want to see in the system. So thank you. Robbie, I wanted to ask you, because I want you, to really, always express, like, how did you feel like you were treated, fairly, and it was equitable, the whole process?
I definitely feel like I was treated fairly. I think working with someone with a lot of experience with other clients is also a huge thing. Glori really helped me see the resources I had, and I got to choose from those, and then, whatever was flexible for me. So I would say I was definitely treated with respect.
Thank you. And that's important, right? Choice, because it is supposed to be, your choice as far as what you want to, see for yourself, and, the options that you have. So I'm very glad to hear that. Angel, I'm sure you have some comments on this as well.
Yeah, when it comes to equity, I don't have too much to say, but I know we just had our CSH summit that happened last week, and I know a lot of the focus was really just making sure that we're very just conscious about the conversations we have around race and ethnicity, and just making sure that services are equal across the board, and making sure that access is equal across the board. My specific my workshop was talking a lot about just the transparency of the system, and you guys have already heard me saying, just talking, like, making sure the expectations are there. Young people have no idea what they're receiving when they call our system, and it makes it a lot easier for people of color who are already untrusting of our system to get access when they understand better how our system works, and that there are people within the system trying to help them, especially when we have people of color and mostly white areas. It's very hard to trust people, very hard to open up and share information. And so it's really our job and our role to make sure that we're being open and honest, and showing a lot of empathy and compassion to people who come into our system, and just making sure that we, as burnt out as we are, and as Zoom fatigued that we are making sure that we are offering the most information and best service that we can to folks when they come in, because otherwise they are not going to come back. And that is usually, people of color who have already been burned many times by other systems, that they haven't even came to ours yet, but they've already been burned many times, and have already had DCF call on them numerous times just for being Black. And I could go on forever, but you guys know where I'm going with this, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, Angel, and yeah, I know you want to leave it there, but it's, I'm glad you bring that up, because that can't you can't continue to go on forever, like you said. So, the more we keep talking about it, the more we keep bringing it up, the more it'll bring, comes to folks' attention who can, have the power to make those changes. So we need to continue to sit at those tables and be involved in those discussions. So thank you. Let's see, we have time here for maybe one or two more questions. I have a question here from Stacy Violante Cote. Can any one of the panelists speak to what's happening with unsheltered youth homelessness? Basically, and that goes to how outreach is happening, right, during COVID. So, yeah, Glori, you had opened up?
Yeah, so that's directly my field right there. So youth will go, when they call 211, they do the CAN assessment, they will be placed on the shelter wait list. Youth usually go to the top of the list as the most vulnerable population. And we are, as we sort through who is at the most need, we are taking clients into the shelter. But because of the virus, we're not running at full capacity right now. But as we are moving clients out and they're getting housed in their own apartments, being part of a housing program, we are taking youth in. So it's just, it's a slower process right now, like I said, because we cannot run to full capacity, but youth are being housed and they are being sheltered.
And what about the outreach component?
So outreach, we, for our agency, we unfortunately don't have that component anymore, but they have, Columbus House does have the outreach, and as they do encounter youth on the street, they will connect them to us. And again, the calling 211 and going through the assessment will happen for that youth and placement.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to speak to outreach and unsheltered? Katie.
Sure. So near the beginning of COVID, the state had received FEMA funding in order to take some folks out of shelters to be able to meet the CDC guidelines and temporarily house them in hotels, motels, which we have been doing for months. The different regions have been working to try to reduce those beds and ensure that folks are housed out of them. But yeah, the few youth-specific crisis housing programs that we have been working to follow CDC guidelines while trying to ensure that that's not a barrier for youth entering in. We always see a little bit of a uptick in unsheltered homelessness during the summer for some folks just refuse to go into crisis housing when the weather is warm and they opt for other options. We still have some barriers where a youth will be with an older partner and, they can't then get into the youth-specific crisis housing because of that. So we have a couple of refusers now because of that. And we have, because it's been difficult gaining employment, housing folks with the landlords and stuff, we have some delays on the tail end of when folks get into rapid rehousing, which is then making longer stays in the crisis housing, so limiting bed capacity as well.
Thank you, Katie. Omar, on outreach, because I know you and I want, since we only have like a couple minutes left, comment from you and Angel.
The kind of extent of our outreach, especially on my end, is school related. Like I said, each school in our school district has staff that are dedicated to attendance issues and going out and finding those kids. And on occasion, when we see a kid or they see a kid walking on the street or whatever and trying to assess why they're out and about, they have run across kids that are homeless, especially certain areas where the homeless hang out. There's always pockets in New Britain of places where, the homeless congregate. So they go to those areas and they're looking for kids specifically and trying to assess why they're there and if they are homeless or unsheltered. So that's on my end, that's kind of how we're doing outreach. I'm sure our youth navigator has better answers than I do regarding that. But as far as and that works, the people that are in the schools that are trained to do that kind of stuff, they're pretty effective in, finding those kids and trying to, get them into the 2-on-1 system and, trying to eliminate their homelessness. It's usually, a lot of other issues go along with that, the mental health parts and, the issue, where's your parent and blah, blah, blah. So, but identifying is, I know outreach is being done and it's somewhat successful.
Thank you. Thank you. Angel, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Katie was saying about young people rejecting like adult shelters because not getting a youth bed. We've been hearing a lot that young people have gone into shelters that are not youth specific, not through IHDP, and just having terrible experiences, not feeling safe, really dirty, just so many negative experiences that I'm sure lots of people have already heard before, a lot of horror stories. But when it comes to the YHTB specific youth beds, when young people can get access to them, that's great, and they are definitely interested in entering them, but there's not always access to those beds.
Thank you. And unfortunately, like I said, we could talk all day on these topics. Thank you to a wonderful panel, great discussion. Glori Bowman, Youth Continuum, Katie Durand, DOH, Angel Cotto, Youth Action Hub, Omar McDew, City of New Britain, and Ewurabena Acquah. Thank you very much for attending and being willing to be panelists today. And I just want to say in closing, thank you for joining. And we have a keynote speaker with Zillow at lunch today. And there's also a little surprise at happy hour at 4 p.m. Please join us for our next session on family homelessness. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.